I want you to cast your mind back to March of 2021. For anyone studying how history, policy, and economics actually, intersect in the real world, this is just a moment you really need to examine
But
close.
absolutely, it's a perfect case study.
Right. We were all still caught in that really strange pandemic-altered reality, spending way too much time just scrolling through our phones in isolation.
The bubble, we were all just glued to our screen.
Exactly. And suddenly, this very specific video starts dominating everyone's feed. And it wasn't a dance trend. It wasn't some celebrity stunt.
No, it was so much more grounded than that.
Yeah. It was a video posted by Sedona Prince, a basketball player for the University of Oregon. She was at the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis. And the reason I really want to start our deep dive here is that this tiny 38-second clip perfectly captures how a single localized data point can just suddenly expose a massive systemic inequity on a national stage.
It really was a watershed moment, just visually.
So Sedona is standing in what was officially designated by the NCAA as the women's weight room. She pans her phone camera across the space, and what we see is a single sad rack of dumbbells.
It's just sitting there.
Yeah, literally 6 pairs of weights,
Yeah.
just sitting there on a small pyramid rack, completely surrounded by empty floor.
It was an incredibly stark visual. And you have to remember the context of the NCAA basketball tournament here. This is March Madness.
Right, the biggest event of the year.
Exactly. This is the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Millions of dollars in television rights are on the line. Millions of viewers are tuning in globally.
And these athletes.
Yeah, these athletes who have spent their entire lives training at an elite level for this exact moment are handed a training facility that you would be honestly disappointed to find in a budget roadside motel.
It's so true. So the mission of our deep dive today is to really look at the 50-year athletic payoff of Title IX. We're starting with that 2021 video to ground us in the reality of today.
Which is important because we can't lose sight of the present.
Right. But then we're going to rewind back exactly 50 years to 1972. We're going to trace the explosive numbers of how women's sports actually grew.
And the numbers are just phenomenal.
They really are. And ultimately, we're going to uncover the hard economic data, proving how playing sports transformed female education and, executive leadership in this country.
And exploring this requires a very specific analytical framework from us, especially for you listening, as students of policy. We have to look at this story being warm, being factual, and being completely honest.
Yeah, we can't just cheerlead.
Exactly. We're going to examine some data sets that are genuinely awe-inspiring. I mean, the scale of societal change we're going to discuss is staggering. But we must ensure we are never triumphalist about it.
Because the story isn't over.
Right. We can't slap a neat little bow on this and declare the problem solved, because as that dumbbell rack showed the entire world, the job is just far from finished.
Okay, let's unpack this 2021 reality check a bit more, because the dumbbells were really just the first layer of the controversy. It was the institutional reaction, like what happened immediately after the video went viral, that really exposes the structural mindset.
Oh, the PR scrambling was immediate.
Yeah, the NCAA was backed into a corner and forced to respond. Their initial public defense was essentially, well, we wanted to give the women more equipment, but we had a severe space constraint at the venue.
A space constraint.
Right. They tried to frame it purely as a logistical issue, like it was just a floor plan problem.
Which is a classic institutional defense mechanism.
Right.
When a glaring disparity is suddenly dragged into the light, you blame the architecture.
Blame the tape measure.
Exactly. Blame the venue logistics. It attempts to remove human bias from the equation entirely. But Sedona Prince didn't just accept that corporate statement.
No, she did not.
She expertly and with just devastating simplicity dismantled that argument in a follow-up video. She stood in the exact same room, held up her phone, and just rotated.
I remember watching that.
Yeah, she panned the camera to reveal a massive, cavernous, nearly empty convention center space right next to that single rack of dumbbells.
Yeah.
I mean, there was enough empty square footage to land a small aircraft.
It was real-time investigative journalism via social media. She didn't yell, she didn't rant, she just showed the physical space and let the visual completely destroy the PR statement.
The contrast was all she needed.
And the contrast was infinitely worse because simultaneously, images and videos of the men's weight room at their tournament bubble were circulating online.
And that looked like a whole different planet.
Oh, totally. The men were provided with a state-of-the-art, fully equipped strength and conditioning facility, rows upon rows of power racks, Olympic weights, custom flooring, heavy bags, the works. It looked like a professional NFL training camp.
The visual gap between the two setups was so wide, it was almost comical, if it weren't so deeply insulting.
Right, and the fallout was immediate. The NCAA was forced to issue a very public, humiliating apology. You had executives specifically saying they were, quote, dropping the ball.
Which is an understatement. But more importantly, the public pressure led to a comprehensive independent review of gender equity across all NCAA championships.
They couldn't just sweep it under the rug anymore.
No, they brought in a high-profile law firm to audit the entire system. That resulting report, the Kaplan report, actually dubbed Sedona Prince's video the shot heard round the world.
Wow.
Yeah. It was the catalyst that forced the entire collegiate sports apparatus to look in the mirror and acknowledge that the rhetoric of equality just did not match the financial and logistical reality.
It makes me think of this analogy. It's like, okay, imagine you've just bought this beautifully renovated modern mansion.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The landscaping is perfect. The kitchen has, imported marble countertops. The living room is straight out of Architectural Digest. You feel like you've completely made it.
Sounds nice.
Right. But then you walk down the hall, you open one specific door to a guest bathroom, and you find out the plumbing is still completely broken, rusted out, and leaking black water straight from the 1950s.
Oh, yuck. But yeah, that's a great analogy.
The structure is vastly better than it was, but the rot is still there in the walls. It forces the question, how do we reconcile this massive structural success with such blatant surviving gaps?
That is the exact tension we need to hold on to throughout this discussion. Because to understand why a single rack of dumbbells in 2021 caused such a seismic reaction, why it felt like such a profound betrayal to millions of people, we have to look backward.
We have to see where we started.
Exactly. We need to understand the historical baseline. We have to rewind exactly 50 years to the world before Title IX existed.
If we don't understand 1972, we just can't fully grasp the magnitude of 2021. So let's establish that stark 1971 to 1972 baseline.
Let's look at the numbers.
We have the data from the National Federation of State High School Associations, the NFHS. They run this annual survey, which is basically the longest-running, most reliable ledger of who is actually playing sports in America.
And those baseline numbers are, well, they're sobering.
Staggering. The numbers from that specific academic year show there were 3,666,919 boys playing high school sports.
Almost 4 million.
Yeah. And compared to that massive number of boys, there were a meager 294,015 girls playing high school sports nationwide.
So we're talking about roughly a 12-to-1 gap.
Think about that ratio. If you are listening to this and picturing walking the halls of a typical American high school in 1971, for every 12 boys who get to put on a Letterman jacket, who get to learn how to compete, how to work within a team and, represent their community, only one girl has that same opportunity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to realize what this actually meant for society on a structural, architectural level.
It wasn't just a lack of interest, right?
Oh, absolutely not. American institutions literally were not built to let women compete. It wasn't a matter of girls deciding they didn't want to play. The infrastructure simply did not exist. There were no leagues, no coaches, no gym time allocated.
It was a desert.
The before world wasn't just unequal, it was a void.
And when you look at the financial reality at the college level prior to Title IX, it's honestly even bleaker. Female athletes received about 2% of college athletic budgets. Let that sink in. 2%.
Which essentially means women's sports were treated as an afterthought. Maybe an intramural hobby or a physical education requirement, if they existed at all.
Yeah, a club at best.
They were entirely marginalized from the actual collegiate athletic enterprise.
Because 2% doesn't buy you chartered buses or specialized coaching staffs or dedicated locker rooms. 2% buys you, weekend bake sales to fund hand-me-down uniforms from the men's JV team.
That was the literal reality for many teams.
And on top of that, athletic scholarships for women were virtually non-existent. The idea that a woman could use her physical talent, her dedication to a sport, to actually fund her higher education, which is a socioeconomic pathway that had been lifting young men out of poverty for decades, that was completely off the table for women.
The entire ecosystem of American sports was exclusively a male domain. The pipelines, the coaching trees, the administrative support, the medical staff, the infrastructure for female athletes had to be built from scratch.
But then came June 23, 1972. President Richard Nixon signs the Education Amendments of 1972, and buried within that massive omnibus legislation is Title IX.
A tiny little provision.
It is a wildly simple piece of legislation. It is just 37 words long, 37 words that state. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance.
That's it.
That's it. It doesn't even explicitly mention the words sports or athletics. Yet those 37 words changed the math forever.
And the resulting change wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow generational shift in cultural attitudes where society, slowly warmed up to the idea of women sweating on a basketball court.
No, it was immediate.
It was an immediate mathematical explosion because suddenly the law required schools receiving federal funds, which is virtually all public schools and universities, to provide equal opportunity or risk losing their funding.
Let's track that immediate growth because this is where the historical ledger basically catches fire. Remember that 71-72 baseline? 294,015 girls.
Right.
Just 1 year later, the 73-74 school year, girls' high school participation leapt to roughly 817,000.
That is nearly a tripling of participation in a single academic cycle.
And it doesn't slow down. By the 77-78 school year, it crossed 2 million. So in roughly half a decade, you go from under 300,000 to over 2 million young women playing organized sports.
The curve is just a vertical line.
I really have to marvel at this curve. If you are studying economic growth or policy implementation, this 1972 to 1978 window represents the steepest stretch of growth in American athletic history. It wasn't a trickle of new opportunity, it was a veritable flood.
You have to imagine the sheer logistical scramble that caused at the local level. High school principals and athletic directors suddenly had to find gym time, hire thousands of new coaches, purchase uniforms, and arrange transportation for millions of new athletes.
Practically overnight.
Exactly, almost overnight. It was a chaotic, messy, incredibly rapid expansion forced entirely by the threat of losing federal funding.
To put that 1970s explosion into our modern perspective, let's contrast that 1972 baseline with the figures we see today. Currently, high school girls' participation is north of 3.4 million.
More than a tenfold increase.
Yeah. And in college, the NCAA reported roughly 30,000 women playing in 1972. By the 40th anniversary of Title IX in 2012, it hit 190,000. And it recently surpassed 200,000 women competing at the collegiate level.
The scale is astronomical. We're talking about generations of women whose lives were fundamentally altered because a legal door was kicked open by those 37 words.
But I think it's easy for numbers on a spreadsheet like 3.4 million here, 200,000 there, to feel like an abstraction.
They lose their weight.
They do. They start to lose their weight when they get that large. So to really see what these millions of participants actually built, we need to look beyond the high school gymnasium. We need to look at the global stage.
Precisely. Because you don't just add millions of people to a highly competitive talent pool without creating massive secondary and tertiary effects.
You're going to get superstars.
Right. When you build a domestic pipeline of that magnitude, you inevitably start manufacturing elite talent. The sheer volume of participation guarantees it.
And the most perfect, undeniable example of this is the soccer pipeline. We can trace a direct mechanical line from this 1972 domestic education policy to the engineering of an international sporting dynasty. I'm talking about the United States women's national soccer team.
The USWNT. What's fascinating here is how delayed the institutional support actually was, even after Title IX passed.
Oh, they fought it, didn't they?
Oh, fiercely. The NCAA, the governing body of college sports, aggressively resisted incorporating women's athletics. They actually fought Title IX in court, arguing it would bankrupt men's sports.
Unbelievable.
Because of this resistance, the NCAA didn't even stage its first women's championships until the 1981-1982 academic year. That's a full decade after the law was signed.
That is wild to me. The law passes in 72, but the primary collegiate athletic body doesn't actually host a championship until 82. But, when they finally do, it sets the stage for something incredible. Let's highlight that 1982 inaugural NCAA Women's Soccer Championship.
Only 12 teams competed in the whole tournament.
Just 12. And it was won by the University of North Carolina, coached by a man named Anson Dorrance.
And Anson Dorrance's UNC program essentially became the engine room, the laboratory for the entire U.S. women's national team.
He really changed the standard.
He did. He created a culture of extreme, unforgiving competitiveness and high-level physical training that simply hadn't existed for women at that scale before. He was treating these college athletes with the same rigorous professional expectations that top-tier men's programs used.
It's incredible to think about. This one college program in Chapel Hill becomes the nucleus for global dominance. Let's detail that dominance for a second. The USWNT has won 4 FIFA Women's World Cup victories: 1991, 1999, 2015, and 2019.
A dynasty.
And look at that 1991 inaugural championship squad. It was built almost entirely out of Dorrance's college players: Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, Joy Fawcett. The domestic college system literally birthed the world champions.
The statistics surrounding this pipeline are almost hard to believe. In the first 31 years of the Women's World Cup, across all the iterations of the U.S. roster, only 2 American players ever reached a World Cup roster without having played college soccer.
Wait, really? Only 2? I am stunned by that.
Just 2.
Over 3 decades of international competition, producing the best team on the planet over and over again, and only T2PO players bypassed the college system. That is how robust, how absolutely essential the collegiate pipeline became.
It became the mandatory proving ground. In other countries, soccer talent is developed through private professional club academy.
Right, like in Europe.
Exactly. But in the United States, because of Title IX, the universities essentially functioned as our national academy system, funded by tuition and federal compliance.
That's a massive competitive advantage.
It is. And this pipeline is actually so robust that it doesn't just supply the United States. It exports talent globally. Slightly over 20% of all players at recent Women's World Cups, representing countries from all over the globe, from Canada to England to Nigeria, have ties to American college soccer.
That is a staggering policy outcome. You have a domestic education law designed in 1972 simply to ensure equal opportunity in American schools, and it inadvertently creates an international sporting dynasty and becomes the premier training ground for the entire world's female soccer talent.
It is the ultimate example of unintended yet massively positive consequences of structural policy. By forcing universities to fund women's sports, the U.S. accidentally built the most comprehensive, well-funded academy system for women's soccer in the world.
But soccer wasn't the only sport where these college gymnasiums acted as incubators for professional arenas. Let's look at college hoops and the mechanical journey to the WNBA.
The trajectory of basketball is just as illustrative of how Title IX shifted the economic landscape of sports. You have to remember that building a sustainable professional sports league from scratch requires 2 fundamental elements.
Talent and fans, basically.
Precisely. A deep roster of elite, recognizable talent, and a dedicated paying audience willing to buy tickets and watch on television.
Right. You can't just announce a brand new league, throw some players on a court, and expect people to show up if they don't know who the players are or, care about the rivalries.
It just doesn't work that way.
And that's where the 2 decades of Title IX-fueled college play come in. From the 1970s through the 1990s, college basketball served as this massive national marketing campaign and development league for the women's game.
It allowed players to develop high-level skills. It allowed intense regional rivalries to form like UConn and Tennessee. And crucially, it allowed fans to become emotionally invested in the women's game.
Which takes time.
It does. This wasn't happening overnight. It was a slow, steady accumulation of cultural capital and athletic excellence.
And this accumulation culminated on a very specific, highly visible global stage, the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. The U.S. women's basketball team went on this absolutely dominant, highly publicized gold medal run.
It was cultural phenomena.
Players like Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops, Dawn Staley, they were charismatic, they were incredibly skilled, and the American public totally fell in love with them.
That 1996 Olympic team was the ultimate proof of concept. The NBA, led by David Stern at the time, was watching this very closely.
They saw the dollar signs?
Oh, absolutely. The Olympic run demonstrated to investors, broadcasters, and corporate sponsors that women's basketball could draw massive television ratings and fill giant arenas.
And the timing of what happens next is definitely not a coincidence. That gold medal is won in the summer of 1996. The WNBA is officially founded on April 24, 1996, capitalizing on that exact momentum with its first official tip-off on June 21, 1997.
The mechanics of this are vital to understand. The NBA didn't have to spend decades and millions of dollars developing these female players from scratch. The universities, compelled by Title IX, had already done that.
The colleges did all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The colleges paid for the coaching, the training facilities, the medical care, and the national television exposure for 20 years. The NBA simply harvested the incredible talent and fan base that Title IX had subsidized and built.
So what does this all mean for us? If we trace the lineage, the existence of a sustainable professional basketball league for women in the late 1990s is a direct descendant of those 37 words signed in 1972.
It's a direct lineage.
The doors opened in those drafty college gyms with the bake sales and shared buses mechanically led to professional locker rooms, national television contracts, and salaries 25 years later.
It is a clear cause and effect timeline in the realm of athletics. But this raises an important question, and is where we need to shift our focus. Because as massive as the World Cups and the WNBA are, they only represent the absolute elite fraction of athletes.
Right, the 0.01%.
Exactly. The most consequential and dramatic payoff of Title IX didn't happen on a soccer pitch or a professional basketball court at all. It happened in the wider economy, affecting millions of everyday women.
This is where the story shifts from sports trivia to hard socioeconomic transformation. And to do that, we have to introduce a labor economist named Betsy Stevenson and her pivotal 2010 study titled Beyond the Classroom.
This study is a masterpiece of economic research. Betsy Stevenson wanted to investigate whether playing sports actually provided a tangible long-term economic benefit to women. Did it change their academic trajectories? Did it alter their earning potential?
Wait, I'm struggling with this premise right out of the gate. If you are studying policy, you know the absolute biggest hurdle in this kind of research is the contested debate of cause versus correlation.
Oh, it's the classic trap.
Because the 1970s had the massive feminist movement, you had shifting cultural norms, the widespread availability of the birth control pill, changing divorce laws. There were huge macro-societal trends pushing women into the workforce and into universities anyway.
A lot was changing all at once.
So how on earth can an economist prove that playing high school basketball caused women to get a better job, rather than just attributing it to general societal progress?
That is exactly the right skepticism to have. If you just look at a standard historical graph, you see a massive surge in girls playing sports in the 70s, and you simultaneously see massive gains in women's educational attainment and workforce entry.
Right, they mirror each other.
A skeptic looks at that and says, well, they just happened at the same time.
Hmm.
It might simply be that the type of ambitious, driven young woman who wanted to go to college and become a corporate lawyer in 1980 was also the exact type of young woman who decided to join the newly formed high school track team. That's correlation. Two trends moving together, but not necessarily driving each other.
Right. Maybe sports didn't make her ambitious. Maybe her ambition made her play sports.
Precisely. To prove causation, Betsy Stevenson needed a way to isolate the effect of sports from all those other massive social trends. And she found her solution in a natural experiment created by the very rules of Title IX compliance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's explain this natural experiment carefully, because it is the entire linchpin of her causal argument. When Title IX was enacted, it required schools to provide athletic opportunities for girls proportionate to the opportunities provided for boys.
Yes, the proportionality mandate. This is crucial. It meant the compliance formula, like how many sports a state had to add for girls, was strictly tied to the pre-existing boys' participation levels in each specific state.
Okay, let me try out an analogy here to see if I have the mechanics of this right. It's like a weighted lottery or a forced economic dosage.
Okay.
Imagine state A, let's say Texas.
Okay, Texas.
Before 1972, Texas had a massive culturally entrenched obsession with high school football and baseball. Let's say 70% of all boys in Texas played sports. To comply with Title IX's proportionality rule, Texas suddenly had to administer a massive dosage of new programming for girls to close that huge 70% gap.
Exactly. Texas had to build girls' sports infrastructure at a furious pace to match the massive boys' infrastructure they already had.
But then imagine State B, maybe a state without a big Friday Night Lights culture. Only 30% of boys played sports there. State B still had to comply with Title IX, but their gap was much smaller.
Right, the benchmark was lower.
Their mandated dosage of girls' sports was much lower. They didn't have to add nearly as many programs to reach that proportionality threshold.
This is the brilliance of Stevenson's natural experiment. The jump in girls' sports participation varied drastically from state to state. But crucially, that variation was driven by an external mathematical formula. The historical rate of boys playing sports in that state, completely unrelated to the girls themselves, their personal ambitions, or the strength of the feminist movement within that specific state's borders.
It essentially functions like a randomized medical trial. The The researchers didn't pick who got the medicine of sports opportunity. The federal compliance formula forced it on different states in different random doses based on old boys football
It's
statistics.
elegant, isn't it?
It is. Because this growth was forced externally, economists like Stevenson could finally isolate the exact effect of the sports participation spike, separating it entirely from those other cultural shifts.
She was able to compare the adult life outcomes of women in states that had a massive forced increase in sports to the outcomes of women in states that had a much smaller forced increase. And because the only difference between these groups was this externally mandated sports boom, she could confidently measure the direct causal impact of athletics on their lives.
So what did this beautifully designed natural experiment actually reveal? Let's deliver the hard data because these numbers are the true lasting legacy of Title Nikes.
Let's hear them.
Stevenson found that a 10 percentage point rise in girls' state-level sports participation generated roughly a 1-point increase in female college attendance.
Which is a highly significant bump when you aggregate it across millions of female students nationwide. That is tens of thousands of women attending college who otherwise wouldn't have, directly because of sports participation.
And it doesn't stop with just getting into college. That same 10-point rise in sports participation generated a 1 to 2-point rise in female labor force participation. Furthermore, it created a 1.9-point increase in the probability of being employed at all.
These aren't just feel-good anecdotal statistics about the value of teamwork. This is hard economic data proving that Title IX directly transformed female graduation rates and career earnings over 5 decades.
It's real money in real pockets.
Absolutely. Playing sports purely as a mathematical variable caused women to get more degrees, enter the workforce at higher rates, and secure steady employment more reliably.
It is a stunning validation of the policy. The data proved sports mechanically led to jobs and degrees. It gave women a tangible, lifelong economic advantage. But the research also seems to suggest that athletic participation shaped who ends up running the companies where those jobs are.
It pushes them to the top.
The impact goes beyond just getting an entry-level position. It extends to reaching the absolute pinnacle of corporate leadership.
Which brings us to the next layer of this analysis, the journey from the locker room to the modern boardroom. If Stevenson showed us that sports increased general workforce participation, we also need to look at the composition of executive leadership.
Let's look at the findings from a major 2014-2015 global survey conducted by EY and SPNW. They surveyed 400 women executives. We are talking about women in the C-suite, managing directors, the people making decisions that move the global economy.
The demographic numbers from this survey paint a very clear picture of the background of these leaders. Of those 400 executives, an astonishing 94% had played sports.
94%. I want to pause on that for a second because that is near total saturation.
Yeah.
You almost cannot find a female executive at that level who didn't play sports.
Furthermore, 52% of them, more than half, had competed at the university level. And when asked about the impact of their athletic background, 74% of these executives explicitly agreed that a background in sport helps accelerate a woman's leadership potential and career trajectory.
Now, I have to jump in and apply the same critical thinking we used with Betsy Stevenson's work. We just spent a lot of time praising her causal data, and we need to be clear about the limits of this executive survey.
Good point. It's a different kind of data.
Right. This ISPNW survey is correlational. It is drawn from a self-selected sample of women who are already highly successful executives. It does not possess the natural experiment framework that Stevenson used.
That is a vital distinction to make. We cannot say scientifically that playing sports caused 94% of them to become executives. The reality might simply be that the type of person who is naturally competitive, deeply driven, incredibly resilient, and drawn to the intense environment of high-level sports is exactly the same type of person who is drawn to the intense competitive environment of climbing the corporate ladder.
The underlying personality traits might predate the activity.
Exactly.
However, when we synthesize this information, when we lay this massive 94% correlation right alongside Stevenson's hard causal economic data showing sports leads to employment, a really powerful, cohesive narrative emerges.
It allows us to construct a highly plausible mechanism for why Stevenson's data looks the way it does. It answers the how. The playing field, the basketball court, the soccer pitch. These are essentially classrooms for soft skills that are incredibly highly valued in the modern economy.
Think about what you actually learn mechanically when you play competitive sports early on. You learn resilience, you learn how to fail publicly, you learn how to lose a game in front of your peers, your parents, and your community, and then how to wake up the next morning, go to practice, and try again.
You learn how to navigate complex hierarchies and teamwork dynamics. You learn how to take harsh, critical feedback from a coach in real time, adjust your performance, and execute.
Which is exactly what you do in a boardroom.
Precisely. It's a skill set directly translatable to taking feedback from a manager or a board of directors. You learn how to perform under intense pressure, how to manage your time fiercely between academics and athletics, and how to communicate effectively in high-stress, rapidly changing situations.
It fundamentally shapes confidence. Think about a young woman in the 1980s or 90s. Stepping onto a field or a court might have been one of the very few places in her life where she was explicitly encouraged to be aggressive, to take up physical space, to physically assert herself, and to loudly demand the ball.
And those are exactly the professional leadership traits required in the modern executive boardroom. The ability to advocate fiercely for your ideas, to bounce back quickly from a failed corporate project, to lead a diverse team toward a common goal under a deadline. The foundational blueprint for those skills was drafted in those Title IX-funded high school and college gymnasiums. The confidence built in the locker room translates directly to executive presence.
It is an incredible 50-year arc to step back and look at. We started in 1972 with fewer than 300,000 girls playing nationwide, with women receiving just 2% of college budgets, literally fighting for table scraps.
This is a very different world.
And we trace that historical line through the steepest growth in athletic history to the mechanical creation of the U.S. women's national team, to the founding of the WNBA, to causal increases in college attendance and labor force participation, all the way to corner offices filled with former athletes.
It is a profound, undeniable success story of legislative intervention. It proves that when you mandate opportunity, the talent, the drive, and the economic potential are already there, just waiting to be unleashed.
But as we established at the very start of this deep dive, celebration without candor betrays the true story. We have to turn honest. We have to look at the gaps that survived this 50-year explosion of progress.
Because societal progress is rarely uniform, and it is almost never complete.
Which brings our narrative full circle right back to where we started, March 2021, Sedona Prince. A single rack of dumbbells sitting in the middle of a cavernous, empty convention center room, while the men down the street had a multi-million-dollar fitness center.
That video was so jarring to the public consciousness because it violently broke the illusion. We'd spent decades celebrating the sheer numbers, the millions of participants, the global dominance of our professional leagues.
We thought we were done.
Exactly. We assumed the fight for basic structural equity was settled history.
But the reality of today, right now, is that even with massive, undeniable growth, the doors opened unevenly. The structural disparities are ongoing.
And we have to list them out to understand the current landscape. Even today, women still receive fewer overall participation opportunities than men at the collegiate level.
The numbers still favor men.
Yes, the proportionality mandate of Title IX that Betsy Stevenson studied is still frequently skirted, manipulated, or outright ignored by institutions using creative accounting.
Women still receive significantly less total scholarship money across the board. The operating budgets, like the daily money used for team travel, for quality of equipment, for daily logistical operations, are routinely significantly smaller for women's programs.
And perhaps most tellingly from an economic perspective, the recruiting budgets, the money spent to actually travel, evaluate, and secure future elite talent, which dictates the future success and revenue generation of a program, are vastly skewed toward men's sports, primarily football and men's basketball.
And as the 2021 video proved so viscerally, female athletes are still often provided with inferior physical facilities, locker rooms, practice gyms, medical centers, compared to their male counterparts at many schools across the country.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical question of our entire analysis. The inherent tension of Title IX is this: how do we intellectually process the fact that we can have extraordinary, undeniable, society-altering progress right alongside unfinished, deeply entrenched inequity?
It's exactly that mansion with the broken plumbing. The overall structure is vastly, undeniably better than it was in 1971. You can admire the beautiful new kitchen, but the rot is still there in the walls of the guest bathroom.
It requires us to hold two seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously. First, Title IX is arguably one of the most successful pieces of civil rights and economic legislation in modern history, fundamentally altering the educational and economic trajectory of millions of women.
And the second truth.
And in second, the institutions tasked with implementing it are still consistently failing to provide true dollar-for-dollar, facility-for-facility equity.
So we've traced this incredible journey. We started by looking at a world in 1972 where fewer than 300,000 high school girls were allowed to compete. We saw how 37 words of federal law mathematically forced that number past 3.4 million today. We traced the mechanics of how that raw numerical explosion built the developmental pipelines that gave us the dominant U.S. women's national soccer team and supplied the talent for the WNBA.
We examined Betsy Stevenson's brilliant natural experiment, which provided the rigorous causal proof that this athletic participation wasn't just about recreation. It directly mechanically boosted female academic success, labor force entry, and career earnings.
We looked at the modern boardroom, where 94% of female executives draw on the resilience, teamwork, and leadership soft skills taught in those very sports programs. We celebrated all of that undeniable progress, but we ended with the dumbbells. We ended with the reality that the financial ledger is still not balanced.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you continue to study the ongoing impact of this policy. We are in an entirely new era of collegiate sports right now.
Things are moving so fast.
So fast. The post-2021 landscape is dominated by completely new economic forces. The massive influx of NIL money-meaning athletes can now legally profit from their name, image, and likeness, alongside the skyrocketing cultural popularity of the WNBA and the massive record-breaking television